Good afternoon. It is Tuesday, my favorite day of the week. I was just talking to Caitlin about that yesterday, so today is a good day. And we're going to be talking about donor-advised funds, which I will now be referring to as a DAF, D-A-F. So what is a DAF? DAFs are essentially funds that are held by charitable organizations or charitable arms of organizations. For instance, Fidelity, Schwab, Vanguard, they all have a DAF option, even though they're investment brokerage platforms. So what is the big deal about DAFs whenever it comes to donating to charity? Well, you've probably heard that they're a method of donating appreciated stock to charities. Why might that be an intriguing idea? Because if we were to sell the stock and give the cash to charity, we are still paying taxes on the gain of that sale, even though we were going to give it away the whole time. That might be why we would want to consider that. Now, a great question probably comes to your mind. Why not just donate the stock to the charity itself? Can't most charities just accept the stock directly? Yes. Most charities do seem to accept shares of stock as a direct transfer, even small church congregations. And for whatever reason, if a charity hasn't set this up yet, it is very easy and very quick for them to do so. So let's say all charities can accept stock directly. I still pose the question, what is the big deal about DAFs, donor-advised funds? Okay, these are all my opinion. They do not reflect the beliefs of my firm or anybody else. And remember, of course, this is not personalized tax advice for anybody. But here are some other benefits of the DAF. Remember, other than donating appreciated stock, because that's a non-starter, when it comes to charitable giving beyond church contribution, if you have other organizations that you really enjoy supporting, here are reasons why you might want to use a DAF to support those organizations. DAFs simplify the giving process across many recipients. If you've got 10 organizations in mind that you know you want to give to, you can donate the stock to the DAF and then indicate where you want that money to go. So the communication is only happening to that one party with the DAF. The large brokerage platforms, they even have a portal set up for you to just hop in and do this all yourself. So instead of tracking down routing and account numbers from various organizations, you are just interacting with one platform to make the various donations. This is particularly helpful with new recipients that you haven't given to before. Most brokerage platforms seem to give you the option of saving a recipient for future use, but initially DAFs provide more simplicity when donating across many recipients. So, if you've got many recipients already in mind for this appreciated stock, a DAF can be a good option to make it a little faster, a little simpler. All right, another potential benefit of a DAF is the timing of the tax deduction. If you are someone who typically takes the standard deduction, or at least usually teeters around whether you take the standard deduction or not, meaning your itemized deductions, property taxes, mortgage insurance, charitable giving, stuff like that, meaning they do not usually exceed the standard deduction, then DAFs provide a potential tax benefit. Typically, when you give to a charity, you can claim the potential tax benefit that year, the year that you gave, or even carry over into the next year in some circumstances. But typically, the recipient receiving the gift and the tax deduction happens together. With the DAF, this is not the case. A DAF separates the act of the recipient receiving the gift and the tax deduction. Meaning, you get the deduction right now, but the gift does not need to be distributed right now. If you had a very large unexpected appreciation and aren't sure yet how to split it up amongst the various organizations that you love to support, you can go ahead and put it in the DAF, take the full deduction now without yet knowing where exactly the funds will be gifted to. Now, again, if you're definitely itemizing every year, this provides you with essentially no tax benefit. In fact, when it comes to people who are definitely itemizing anyway every year, there is no financial benefit to you using a DAF. This is very important, okay? If you are already itemizing, if you're giving local taxes, mortgage interest, things like that, are already exceeding that $30,000 standard deduction, married filing jointly, a DAF provides you no financial benefit. But if you occasionally take the standard deduction, then this timing of taking the deduction now on next year's donation can provide you with a lower tax bill. Okay, so these are the two big reasons to use a DAF. One, they make giving slightly more simple from an admin perspective. We're talking maybe an hour or so a year if you have many recipients. And if you are somebody who sometimes takes the standard deduction, DAFs can give you an extra year where you benefit a little more from itemizing when you have atypically large gains in a brokerage account. And another reason some say to use a DAF that isn't a real reason is the ability to donate appreciated stock. Almost all organizations are already set up to handle this. And if they are not, tell them to, and they'd be very appreciative, I would imagine. Now, I want to look at some cons to using a DAF as opposed to donating directly that stock to the charity. Simply put, less money goes to the charity. If you give stock to a charity, they get all of it. If you give through a DAF, the charity gets the donation minus whatever the DAF took out for their admin costs, management costs of the funds, and cost of the investments themselves. Yes, DAFs charge oftentimes a percentage-based AUM fee, similar to the way that an advisor would. But this time, it is not you paying for it. It is the charity that would have received the stock. They are paying the AUM fee as well as the cost of the investment vehicles, so that gift is a little smaller by the time it gets to them. That is one of the cons. The charity gets less. Now, if it's only sitting in there for a little bit, then this might not be as much money as it could be, but it is happening to some degree. And here's the big con to me, even bigger than charities getting less money, so you know this is going to be a big one. We mentioned before that DAFs separate out the taxable benefit from the actual receiving of the gift by the recipient. Those are two separate events. Keep that in mind and what it might mean for consumers. We also just talked about the idea that DAFs aren't doing this for free, but they make money by having larger amounts of money sitting under their management for longer. Okay? I want to dig into what this means. Let's first look at it from the consumer perspective. DAFs provide potential tax benefits to those who are moderate earners, moderate net worth. Because if you're very wealthy, lots of taxable assets, DAFs provide you with no financial benefit, most likely. If you're giving, you've got property, you're already itemizing. If your assets are smaller and the donation of appreciated assets would not push you over that standard deduction, DAFs also provide no financial benefit to the consumer there either. So here's who it does help. Middle-class people with moderate assets who may be able to use the appreciated sale of stock to fund their giving that they had already planned, or giving that they newly feel called to give. But we have now introduced a temptation, I think, when it comes to our generosity, especially if used for our church contribution. Let's tackle that one real quick. Somebody now has the option of donating larger assets to the DAF and using it to fund their regularly scheduled contribution of the next several years, potentially. By the way, the funds in a DAF are not yours. That's not your money. The DAF can do whatever they want with it. Now, it's in their best interest to follow your wishes, or people won't use them, but technically that money has left your possession in the year you funded the DAF. That is why you got the deduction that year. So that's not your money anymore. I do believe that. So did you give your typical contribution for several years? Or did you give a larger gift one year and then go years of not giving at all? I think that's a real question that we need to ask ourselves when potentially dealing with a DAF. On top of that, has our previous gift made us less generous with our current assets? I think that is something to watch out for. The tax deduction is appealing. To moderate earners who may get a taste of that itemized deduction, that can be appealing. So we just need to at least be mindful. The other incentive to be aware of is that of the DAF itself. DAFs make money by holding your assets. The more assets they hold for a longer period of time, the more money they make. They are not incentivized to make a timely dispersal of the funds. Not to say that they don't. My favorite broker, they ship them out in less than a week, but not all DAFs do that. And the longer it sits, the more money they make. In a private fund, there's a required payout rate where X amount has to be dispersed every year, something like 5%. DAFs do not have that. They don't have a requirement to distribute the money. Now, again, they do, because if they didn't, they'd go out of business. But that is what they are, a business, and they are not necessarily incentivized to send the funds out always in a timely manner. Because of this, I want to highlight this stat. In 2020, $150 billion were sitting inside of donor-advised funds. In 2023, 3 years later, how much money do you think was sitting inside of donor-advised funds? Remember, it was $150 billion 3 years ago. By the way, this is the last year we have data on, is 2023. So in 2023, there were $150 billion sitting in DAFs. I'm sorry, in 2020, there were $150 billion sitting in DAFs. In 2023, $250 billion were sitting in donor-advised funds. This historic trend that is consistent every year is what some refer to as the DAF conundrum. This idea that separating out the tax benefit from the charity actually receiving the gift, coupled with the incentive of the donor advised fund to hold the funds and the lack of requirement to distribute, might possibly be contributing to their notable increase in the amount that lives in these funds. This is why I am at least hesitant of DAFs who advertise reasons to keep your money with them for longer periods of time. The National Christian Foundation, one of the more popular DAFs in faith-based circles, they put out a video a while back where they stated 4 areas of generosity where they can partner with you on. Out of those 4 areas, only one of them mentioned were the actual giving and distributing to generous causes. The other 3 were cultivating unity with your family, which seems to mean pooling resources together and deciding together where they go, And DAFs are not a unique solution to that problem, by the way. Another reason was establishing a legacy of generosity, which, as you can imagine, means keeping it going after you are gone. And the other reason was helping you to be tax efficient. And not to pick on them specifically, they're certainly not alone in their marketing and advertising. But I always have to wonder when I see things like this, why they're doing what they're doing. It is a business, and I understand that. But in this business, remember, the charities fund the operation of the business, assuming that you would have given the money anyway, of course. Not to say that we can't responsibly use a DAF. There are DAFs with solid responsiveness when it comes to distribution of assets. There are DAFs with good payout rates who disperse a large percentage of the assets that are stored. And by the way, my favorite brokerage platform, Fidelity, excels in these areas, and it's very easy to set something like this up there. I am not incentivized in any way to say that. I just think they do a good job. And if we do have appreciated stock that we'd like to give beyond typical levels of giving, a DAF could make that process a little simpler than taking the time to deal with each organization directly. Although now that I say that out loud, maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe it is, I don't know. Remember that DAFs are not some magical way to donate appreciated stock. Most organizations are more than happy to take your money. Remember that DAFs only offer a financial benefit to those who are not itemizing every year anyway. And keep in mind that DAFs do receive a financial benefit from that contribution. And not only the DAF, but the investment companies that participate as well. I hope that adds a little more color to these donor advised funds, a little more perspective on when you may or may not use one and what they are for. It's amazing how many people use donor advised funds to say, look, here's a way you can donate appreciated stock, and here's the only way. So they're not inherently wrong, they're not inherently evil, but we do need to be mindful of why we're using them and how we are using them. That is all I have for you today. Have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday and a good rest of your week. I will talk to you later.